update number 79, 80, somewhere in there. 01 software update and power recharge is sitting at about the 39 or 40% mark. I've been crawling between decks to inspect the copper wiring and piping. God, these things last for fucking ever, don't they? The internal cameras are sketchy at best. The external cameras are still dead. That's probably the water pressure. We'll need replacements. I don't know what to tell you. I'm the only one down here, and there's about a mile of access tunnels and paneling to go through, so progress is slow. I hope Robert's doing a good job because I am pretty much stuck where I am. I mean, sonar still works, but we won't be deep diving anytime soon at this rate. I imagine I would be the one to know first if it woke up, so there you go. Tell Director Carney that progress is slow but steady. Having a crew of 1 is stupid, and scratch that. Progress is happening. Return time estimated as 103019, but don't hold me to it. T out.
Hello and welcome to another edition of D&D Stories. I am your host Rob from the channel Performance Check, and this is the show where I regale you with stories that were forged in the fires of the hit role-playing game Dungeons and Dragons. This is the beginning of a new tale, a tale about what happens when player characters, in particular Valdane the Wandering Sorcerer and the returning Droskor Hammerstone of the Undercroft, go up against an omnipotent foe, a being that can change the very fabric of the world, an unstoppable power. This is the story of what happens when player characters go up against the Dungeon Master. This is Lockthorne, Part 1. For those of you who have been paying attention to the editions of D&D stories that I've been telling thus far, I have on a few occasions stated that the way that we played the game back in the 3.5 days, where it was just me, Mike and Matt, my two friends, we would revolve who would be the Dungeon Master. And as I had introduced the game to these two, more so Matt than Mike. Mike had played a tiny bit before, but as I'd introduced the game to them, I was a Dungeon Master for the first campaign. Mike had a little bit of experience, became the second Dungeon Master, and he ran the Devil's Line story, which was the one that I've just told. And now it's Matt's turn. It's Matt's turn to take the crown of Dungeon Master. However, whilst this was a joyous occasion, and whilst this was going to be the first time that me and Mike would play together side by side as our trusted characters, Valdane the Wandering Sorcerer and Droskor Hammerstone the Dwarven Fighter, there was a slight problem. Throughout the previous 2 campaigns that we had played, Mike and Matt, whilst they were very good friends, the best of friends in fact, they had a certain rivalry when it came to D&D. They had a kind of playful bickering that would occur whilst we would play the games, both in character and out of character. So the entire relationship of Droskor and Theodrex being this sort of these 2 adventurers that are continually arguing with each other, but at the same time have an awful lot of respect and loyalty towards each other. That's where it all came from. It was born from reality. It was born from the fact that Mike and Matt would bicker all the time. And it was a competitive rivalry. But then, when Mike took over as Dungeon Master, oh well. Matt seemed to think that on occasion, Mike would be persecuting Matt's character, Theodrex of Hemlon, from the position of a Dungeon Master now rather than as a player. And I always thought that was a bit too harsh. I didn't think that Mike was in any way gunning after Theodrex. After all, Theodrex, if you've listened to that story, did rather well in the end. However, there have been moments in time when I think back on the last two stories where I'm like, maybe some of the actions that Mike and thus his character Droskor took that were perhaps a bit too much. For instance, if you look at the first story, The Shroud, Droskor deliberately dives out of the window, or rather out of the citadel of Valdenor, directly after Theodrex. Mike made a conscious effort to ensure that Droskor was diving directly after Theodrex, therefore ensuring that he would have a chance of landing on the Ranger. Now, as you may recall, if you've listened to that story, it was put on a die roll. But Mike has a habit of being very jammy with his die rolls, and he got what he wanted, and Droskor landed on Theodrex and killed him. Matt never forgot that. Matt also never forgot how the T-Rex in the Devil's Line story gunned straight for him instead of going after Valdane. Now, Theodrex, as I recall, was closer to the T-Rex than Valdane was. However, Matt seemed to think that this again was some kind of persecution against his character, against Theodrex of Hemlon. You will forgive me, dear viewers, for going on this tangent, but I feel it prudent. In fact, I feel it entirely 100% necessary to give you context of the situation and of the mentality that Matt must have been in before he decided to run the campaign known as Lockthorne. Matt had motivation. Matt had a desire for payback. And I don't condone this sort of mentality when it comes to running games. I don't think the Dungeon Master should be an antagonistic element of the game as a whole. But this was Matt's first time. Matt had never DM'd before. And I also state this because I won't be telling you the whole story of this campaign. The reason being is that it bore a number of similarities to the story I've just told you, The Devil's Line. It bore quite a lot of similarities to the campaign that Mike had run, and a few similarities to the campaign that I'd run previously, The Shroud. Now, he can't be blamed for that. He's never run a game before, and he's had two examples of what a D&D campaign should be. Of course, it's going to be similar. Of course, it's going to borrow certain elements. So instead of going through a campaign which in a number of ways shares some aspects of stories you've already heard, I will be exploring the many attempts that Matt as a Dungeon Master made upon our characters' lives. Theodrex of Hemlon. For those of you who missed The Devil's Line will not know that he is currently in the position of the Steward. He is currently the temporary ruler of the capital of a realm known as Arland, to the south of Main Realm, the continent on which these stories take place. And he, upon this temporary throne, has actually been doing an okay job. Theodrex is an impulsive individual. He likes a party, and as we all know, he likes a drink as well, which will become problematic in future stories. And I assure you, this time of Theodrex being in this position is sort of like a comfortable and practical solution to how Theodrex not be involved in the next campaign, as Matt, who plays him, is now running the game. So anyway, Theodrex is ruling, and although his methods are a little bit peculiar and a little bit impulsive, as I said, he's doing an okay job. And while he's been governing, he's also been enjoying himself immensely. He has a treasury of which he can deign to commit funds to, you know, and he decides that he's going to stock the kitchens, essentially, and he stocks the wine larders. And this is the first time we're really starting to focus on kingdom building within these campaigns. Before, we've just had characters go on one adventure then after the next. But now they're gaining a reputation, they're gaining wealth, and they're gaining position and standing within the world. And Theodrex is wasting no time whatsoever in using that influence. But meanwhile, whilst Theodrex has been ruling, admittedly a temporary ruler, but while he's been ruling, Valdane, his now trusted comrade, the wandering sorcerer, has been dividing his time between helping Theodrex rule in Agistel and travelling to the Tower of the Jinn, which is this vast tower that rises from the sea to the eastern, it's off the eastern coast of Ireland. And the Tower of the Jinn, again for those of you that didn't see Devil's Line, was this vast tower which is home to the Wishwriters, these individuals, these scholars that have denoted all historical interactions with the Jinn, the race, the powerful race in D&D. And they revere this power and they keep records of it, and they have powerful magical items that have been gifted to individuals by these powerful creatures across the history of Mainrealm. And Valdane has been using his time between Agistel and the Tower of the Jinn to train. He's been learning about the mystical arts, like he's wanting to become more powerful as a sorcerer. And it is one day that the Wishwriter, a scholar, approaches Valdane and says, "Valdane, we have come across something that your friend Theodrex might find interesting." Valdane just looks up from his notes. He's been busy writing, he's got ink all over his fingers, and he says, "What is it?" And the Wishwriter unfurls a parchment and says, "An artist of the area known as Orenthale, the kingdom northeast from here, has done this rendering. We think you might find it interesting." Valdane frowns and takes this rendering, and he looks at it, and you can see that what it is a chalk rubbing. For those of you who are into really old school D&D, you weren't a proper adventurer unless you did like a rubbing of of runes or carvings or something, so you get the exact detail of what something like a magical glyph would look like for later research and the like. So Valdane looks at this rubbing on this parchment with a careful eye, and all it says is, "Help me." Signed, Droskor Hammerstone, son of Brogar, son of Krant. And Valdane frowns and looks to the scholar and says, has there been any kind of context? Has there been any details about where this has come from? And the Wishwriter says, "Well, it's funny you say that, Valdane, for our expert north of here has actually been to look at this message and has noted that the markings that were made, what this rubbing was made from, was created over 2,000 years ago." His eyes widen. "Well, then it can't be the same Droskor Hammerstone. I've never met this dwarf, but he died and vanished." And the Wishwriter says, "Maybe so, but that dwarf is very famous in Orenthale. He and Theodrex saved it. It might be worth showing the new steward." So Valdane nods, takes the rubbings, and heads to Agistel. Valdane breaks this news to Theodrex, who, in his position of rulership, deems that money should be sent to the Wishwriters at the Tower of the Jinn for them to ensure that they can acquire the right magical components necessary to summon Droskor back from whatever time he was sent to. And so it was that after a vast amount of preparation, Valdane, Theodrex and the Wishwriters gather in a circle about the very top of the Tower of the Jinn, and chanting begins as all of the scholars of this powerful place unite in a ritual of chronomancy, where they reach into the temporal winds, and from this portal that rips through the fabric of reality. A heavy metal shape explodes and hits Theodrex directly in the chest. Theodrex rolls back and discovers that it is in fact his long-lost friend Droskor Hammerstone, who had carved a message into a mountain known as Drenfell, the place where he was banished from this timeline. He'd carved a message. He'd carved a message for it to be found thousands of years later to try and get someone to help him back. And it worked, and that was essentially our way of getting Droskor out of the convenient time jump back into the present narrative. Droskor rises to his feet. He has a harrowed look in his eye, and he raises his Urgrosh and begins stalking towards Theodrex. Valdane does a double take. He's looking at this dwarf advancing on his fallen friend. Theodrex is looking at the dwarf with horror in his eyes, and as Droskor approaches, he raises his Urgrosh and says, "You took your time!" And he bursts into laughter, grabs Theodrex and pulls him into a tight embrace, and he says, "You did it! You finally brought me back! I've been gone almost a year, by my reckoning." And Theodrex is just stunned, but then he begins to laugh and returns the embrace. "Droskor, I thought you were dead. I had an existential crisis. I got incredibly drunk." And Droskor says, "How is that different from any other day?" And they laugh again, and it's great to have Droskor back. There's a sort of humour that the dwarf brings with him that has been missed greatly. Theodrex turns to look to Valdane and says, "Droskor, whilst you've been gone, I've been making allies, powerful allies. This is Valdane, the sorcerer. He and I have had our own adventure whilst you've been gone." And they share stories, and finally Theodrex says, "Well, what happened to you? Where have you been ever since you fell from Drenfell? Like it's been a mystery. I've looked for you. I looked for days. I could not find a trace of you." And Droskor begins to explain, but then says, "There will be a time for this. Right now I want some food in my belly and enough ale to down a dire ox." And laughing, they return to Agistel and celebrate. And it is during that time of celebration that Droskor informs Theodrex and Valdane about his adventures. Droskor had been transported back to a time known as the Age of Dragons, where dragons rule with a tyrannical grasp across the entire world, where Zorfintal, the game of dragons, was the way that everything would be decided. All laws, all wars, everything would be decided by this great war of the dragons. And Droskor essentially had been flung into this nightmare and had basically been trying to find his way home with the help of some dwarven kin of the time. So after they have revelled and swapped stories, they enjoy a number of weeks relaxing, training, and spending time in each other's company in Agistel, in the city. And they grow used to this life of comfort for a short while. Valdane continues his study. Droskor has his armour and his equipment repaired from the battering that it's taken for a year in essentially constant conflict. And Theodrex does his best to keep on top of the administrative procedures that a steward must commit to. But it is one day when a messenger arrives at the steward's throne where Theodrex sits and says, "Lord Steward, there appears to be a disturbance." "What kind of disturbance?" says Theodrex. "In the river." Theodrex frowns. "The river is frozen over." "Not anymore it isn't," says the messenger. Theodrex looks across the hall. Droskor's just there drinking ale. Valdane is reading a book, and all of them rise and they instantly go to the walls where they can look from the keep of Agistel to the river. And Looking out, they see there is indeed a disturbance in the river. Where the river had frozen over from many, many years ago, most of it has thawed completely. And within the centre of this vast estuary that sort of begins pouring out towards the coast, they see a huge whirlpool swirling rapidly. They look at each other alarmed, and we as players sort of start getting a little bit shifty, like, oh my god, what's going to come out of that whirlpool? Valdane prepares some defensive spells, casting mage armor. Droskor pulls out his Urgrosh, rolling his shoulders, ready for another fight. Theodrex commands his men now to bring him his bow, and they do so. He knocks an arrow. And then, pouring from out of this whirlpool, rise a number of majestic creatures with wingspans 15 feet wide. They're griffins. Griffins flying from out of the water. And we all frown. Why are griffins in the water? And Valdane looks to Droskor, and Droskor looks to Theodrex, and Theodrex looks back at Valdane. Griffins aren't known to be aquatic creatures. But then with a careful look, Valdane squints and he can see that there's some kind of energy at the centre of this whirlpool. It's almost like these griffins are coming out of a portal. And they are making a beeline straight towards the battlements on which our heroes stand. And Theodrex doesn't quite know whether to make the shot or not, when this griffin lands before them, and upon its back they see there is a rider. A number of riders on these griffins, in plate armour and long, majestic, flowing blue cloaks. An individual swings from the saddle, removing a helm to show long, blonde hair. He is the epitome of a heroic fantasy figure. And he stands forth before Theodrex and Droskor and Valdane and says, "Am I correct in assuming that I am addressing the steward of this?" And he looks around with sort of like a distasteful look in his eyes and says, "This gem of a city." Theodrex sort of frowns for a moment and says, "You are. What is your business here, and why do you encroach upon our territory?" The Griffin Rider smiles. "I mean no offence. I am merely a messenger." "Quite a lot of armour for a messenger," says Droskor. The Griffin Rider smiles again and says, "These are dangerous times, and where I come from we believe in protecting the words that we send across and through the seas." And Valdane says, "Where exactly from across the sea do you hail?" "It's a nice trick you have there with a whirlpool." "Ah, yes. A simple ocean stride spell, cast by a very powerful individual. In fact, the powerful individual that sent us. His name is Mathis of the King's Order of Lockthorne. That is from where we hail." "Lockthorne," says Valdane. "Can't say I've ever heard of it." Droskor shakes his head. Theodrex also shakes his head. The Griffin Rider looks a little bit put out that none of these individuals that he's addressing know about Lockthorne. And he says, "I am Darius, and I am commander of the Griffin Riders, and I have been bidden by Mathis to send this message. We want to hire you." Theodrex narrows his eyes further. "What do you mean, hire us? Surely a messenger bird could have sent a request for such a thing." "It is imperative that word reach you as soon as possible. In fact, a vast amount of resources have been put into ensuring this message gets to you as soon as possible." "Hang on," says Valdane. "Where is this Lockthorne?" We hail from far across the sea, and while we could have ridden across the waves upon ships, it would have taken far, far longer. We had to use what magic we could to ensure this message arrived with you safely. So, why us? Says Droskor. Well, says the Griffin Rider, your reputation has some weight, it would seem, in Main Realm. And word travels far, even across the Silver Sea. We understand that it is due to the efforts of Theodrex of Hemlon and Droskor Hammerstone of the Undercroft that a necromantic threat was foiled that could have devastated the entire realm of Orenthale. We also know that a powerful sorcerer named Valdane joined Theodrex of Hemlon in facing off against a demonic threat and stopped the Devil's Line from appearing once again. And this almost seems a bit too convenient for us to really take on board, but we say, okay, fair enough. And it's nice in a way, it is nice, and I've mentioned it before, when as players you discover that your character's actions are beginning to resonate throughout the world. It just seems funny that this message has resonated across the ocean. This Lockthorne does not belong to the continent of Main Realm. Very well, says Valdane, if you wish to hire us, I'm sure we would all agree that we'd like to know what we're being hired for. Darius smiles and says simply, it is a matter of succession. Lockthorne is in need of a king, and it is sad to say that our king died without fully establishing an heir. Theodrex looks over at Droskor and then at Valdane. I don't know really how we can help with that. Oh, well, we are in need of adventurers, for we have a solution, we just do not know how to acquire said solution. All will be made clear, but first you must come with us. You will ride upon the griffins, and we shall go through the ocean stride to Lockthorne. And so it was agreed that both Droskor and Valdane will set upon this mission, for Theodrex, as we've established, has to remain behind, for he has the duties of a steward to maintain, which is a rather convenient way of having Theodrex written out of this particular story, because Matt's the one who's DMing. So, Droskor and Valdane approach the griffins that are standing there. There are two griffins that don't have riders. And this is where it begins, dear viewers. You've been patient and you've been waiting, but now begins the time where the DM instantly decides to make things difficult and says, to successfully mount the griffins, you are going to need to make an animal handling check. And I'm playing as Valdane, and I look over at Mike, and Mike's looking at his character sheet, and we're both like, neither of us are particularly good at animal handling. And luck would have it, Valdane is all right. He rolls, and I think I got a reasonable number. I passed the check. I think I got like a 16 on the die or something. And Valdane approaches the griffin and is able to rest a hand upon its beak, and it gives it like a little snap, but it doesn't really, go after him or anything. Droskor rolls like a 2. And instantly, the griffin seizes Droskor's arm and begins trying to drag him around the battlements, and we're like, what? The griffin starts attacking Droskor because Droskor failed an animal handling check. And Mike says, do I need to roll initiative? And Matt just says, no, you just take. And he rolls once, twice, 2 times. 18 points of piercing damage as this griffin is snapping and pecking at you with its beak. And Mike's like, but you didn't even roll an attack against my armor class. And Matt's like, are you getting on the griffins or are you not? And we're like, oh, okay, this is okay. Alright, we'll get on the Griffins. So Valdane and Droskor get on the Griffins, but again, Droskor has to get the right animal handling check. So we're just sat there waiting for Mike to roll the right number. And we're like, well, you know, are you just going to let him do infinite amount of attempts? Because if you're going to do that, you might as well just let him get on, and then this is entirely pointless. Eventually, the right number comes up, and Droskor is able to mount the Griffin, who doesn't seem particularly happy to have a heavily armoured dwarf upon its back, but whatever. Darius looks back from his saddle and says, "Are you ready, bold adventurers? For now you shall behold my homeland." And they're like, "Yeah, alright, just get on with it." And it's almost like the Griffins know. They're like horses, they understand if you're fearful. And Droskor isn't particularly happy about being in the saddle of a horse, let alone a griffin. So these creatures take off, and immediately we're asked to do animal handling checks to remain in the saddle as we fly over the city. Droskor is barely able to remain in the saddle of this griffin. Valdane again is okay. Like I think he had like a couple of points in animal handling, so he could like basically ride a horse okay. Or it was a ride check, actually. I think it was in 3.5. Could be wrong, I have to look that up. But anyway, they are flying above this whirlpool now, and now Valdane is able to get a good look down into the centre of it. And indeed, there is an ocean stride portal deep in the centre of this whirlpool. And as he's making a note of this, the griffin dives, and we're asked for another animal handling check, which Droskor fails. And the griffins plunge into this portal, whilst Droskor is just free-falling and falls through the portal without a griffin. And everything is dark as these griffin mounts plus Droskor falling plunge through this portal and erupt out of a mirrored whirlpool upon a vast coastline. This whirlpool is swirling within the ocean, and these griffins take flight out of the whirlpool. Valdane follows shortly after, and Droskor is flung high into the air, portal style. You know, the energy you take in comes out with you, and Droskor is just soaring into the air, and is at that point that Valdane reaches across, because me as a player, I've had enough of this already, and I say, I cast telekinesis. Valdane reaches out a hand and casts telekinesis, a new spell. We've leveled up a few since the, we've leveled up a bit, and Valdane is able to seize Droskor out of the air with telekinesis, and is just holding the dwarf there whilst he's flying on the griffin. And they see before them a verdant landscape, this lush green land known as Lockthorne. But at the height they are at upon Griffin back, they can see into the horizon, and they see that not all of this place is a beautiful, lush fantasy landscape. No. Upon the very horizon, they see a border in the land where everything that was green and verdant and beautiful turns to desert. And Valdane's eyes narrow as he's watching it whilst holding Droskor in this telekinetic grip. And eventually, the griffins soar down to this singular, small stone keep. Landing, Valdane just jumps off the griffin and says, "I'll be glad if we don't have to do that again." And Darius says, "Well, that's probably how you'll be getting home." And Valdane just... In fact, I go, "Really?" But at least we're here. The characters have arrived in Lockthorne. Now, I'm hoping you're beginning to see what I mean now, dear viewers. That moment in that game, to me at least, could have been a really cool skill challenge where we had to fly through a magical portal with griffins, and it be, I don't know, maybe there would have been a combat, maybe there would have been something wicked. But instead it was just a relentless asking us to do continual animal handling checks, like all the way through it, which obviously our characters weren't particularly well equipped to handle. animal handling. Forgive the pun, it wasn't intended. And that's fine, because there should be some skill challenges that player characters can't do. There are characters that have weak points, I grant you. But this was literally to get us to the land where this campaign is to begin. It hasn't even started yet, and already we have sort of like this dice grind where we're like, have we done a successful animal handling check? It lasted a long time. But anyway, that said, we're now at Lockthorne, and Valdane and Droskor are just staring at this old, battered, small keep. I was under the impression this was a kingdom, says Droskor, and in fact, the individual that sent you to us was Mathis of the King's Order. Darius completes Droskor's sentence. Yes, that's right. Well, I'll let him explain. And Darius basically hammers on the door with a gauntleted hand. There is a long pause. Valdane and Droskor are just staring at the door. Eventually it opens, and they have to do that, because before them stands a very short, frail old man. "Oh, hello, Darius," says the old man. "Ah, I see you have brought with you the heroes that I had summoned." "Yes," says Darius. "The money, old man." And Valdane and Droskor sort of look to each other. This doesn't seem right. The old man, sort of like in tatty robes, reaches into a sleeve and pulls forth a big pouch of coins and just presses it into Darius's hand. Darius gives a nod and looks at Valdane and Droskor with sort of like a sneering grin, and goes with his comrades onto the griffins, and they fly away. What was that?" says Valdane. "You'll forgive me, but hang on," says Droskor. "Are those... They said that they were griffin riders of Lockthorne." "Oh, no. They are indeed griffin riders," says the old man, "but they're not of Lockthorne. They do not represent Lockthorne. No, they're mercenaries, but I had to ensure that the word got to you safely." "We were under the impression this was a kingdom," says Valdane. "Well, it was," says the old man, "and a kingdom I hope to restore it into being. But, no. This is a small deception, I grant you, but necessary, I feel." "Why?" says Valdane. "Why? That's so weird. Why did you do that?" And we as players are like, what? Hang on. We thought that these griffin riders represented like the kingdom of Lockthorne. No. They're just mercenaries that were just paid to just send a message. We're like, what? There is no real established kingdom here in Lockthorne. I seek to reinstate it. We need to find the lost heir of Lockthorne, and that is why I have summoned you." "Right," says Droskor with a frown, and he's looking at Valdane, and Valdane's just like... And me and Mike are looking across the table at each other like, "Okay, this is confusing. Would you like to come in?" says the old man. "Well, yeah, I suppose. Now we're here," says Valdane, and they go inside. The old man begins brewing some tea, and Valdane and Droskor are just sat there, just really confused. And they feel the weight of how far away they are from Main Realm. They're a long way away. They're basically across the other side of the world. And they wait with bated breath to hear this old man's explanation. Mathis eventually sits down in front of the disgruntled Valdane and Droskor, and he says, 20 years ago there was a vibrant kingdom that controlled these lands. It indeed was the heart of governance, and it was here, within Lockthorne, we all strived and lived a very good life. However, after a conflict with the Wastelanders, and he sort of looks out of the window to the west where the desert lies. After a conflict with the Wastelanders, the kingdom began to fall into disrepair. It was bankrupt, hyperinflation, destroyed the markets and the economy here, and the king could not sire an heir. He was cursed and taken ill by some foul magic of the West, and he died without producing a son. At least, a son who is fit to rule in the royal line. Droskor says, "So he did have children?" "He did, yes. It is said that the king fathered a bastard, who would of course now be the rightful heir, now that none of his line remain. But we do not know where he is. There are only accounts told the king had been shown this child by the mother one night before he bade her away, and that the child was to have no part in the future of his kingdom." And we're sort of sat there like, well, if he didn't have another heir, surely that would have done. He'd have a son. He could, he could legitimize the bastard. And we express that, and Mathis goes, "Well, he didn't." And we're like, okay, so okay, so he just didn't. He didn't do it. Okay, all right. Carry on. And he says, "Well, yes, and now we need to find the bastard who should now be of age." And we're looking across the table at each other, Mike and I. "Well, how do we do that then?" "There is a medallion when brought in the proximity of one with royal blood. It glows like the light of the moon." And Valdane and Droskor just sort of shake their heads. "Where is the medallion?" "Ah, it is lost. It is lost to the deserts that encroach from the west." And Droskor's like, "Of course it's lost. Of course it's lost. Of course it's lost. Something that's incredibly valuable, that could be very useful to this situation, is lost. Okay. How do we find it?" "Well, it was buried with an ancient king, for it was been a long time since the need of such an artifact was required. He was buried with it." "Why was he buried with it? It sounds really useful," says Valdane. "The problem is," Mathis continues, "is that the burial site of that king has been lost to the wastes. Much has changed since the deserts have encroached from the west." "What's going on with the deserts?" says Valdane. "Why are the deserts encroaching?" "Well, there is a dark power." "Of course there's a dark power. There's always a dark power," says Valdane. "Okay, fine. Well, you know what? Let's just go and try and find it." "Ah, but it's not so simple," says Mathis, rising to try and stop Valdane from just walking out of the door. "It's not that simple. You need 3 pieces of a map. 3 pieces of map. And each piece of the map is located in different sites across the realm of Lockthorne." And we're like, "Okay, where are these sites?" "Well, I have a map to them." It's like, oh, of course, you have a map to them, but you don't have a map to the lost tomb. Great, just give us the map. So, eventually, after a very exasperated negotiation, and after it is decided that Valdane and Droskor will take significant payment from this man who's getting gold from somewhere, they decide that they're going to find these 3 pieces of the map, to find the tomb, to find the medallion, to find this bastard heir to Lockthorne. Okay, the adventure begins. Now, as I stated at the very beginning of this video, which now seems like a very long time ago, that I will not be telling you the entire story of this campaign, because the very beginning of this campaign involved Valdane and Droskor delving into what were essentially 3 identical dungeons to recover 3 different pieces of this map to work out where this tomb was, which we thought was really strange. But we did it anyway. You know, we did it for the XP. We did it for the loots. We did it for the hell of it. Essentially, Valdane and Droskor were in their element in this sense because they were taking down orcs. They were taking down... there was like a crazy band of bugbears at one point. They marched their way through hordes of undead. Everything that Matt put in front of us, invariably, we would smash. By this point, I got quite used to using Valdane as a character, so I was getting quite a lot of cool spell combinations and things that work really wonderfully, like the magic system does in D&D. And Droskor, Mike had obviously been allowed to level Droskor up to the point that he was even with Valdane and Theodrex's level. And now, Droskor was unstoppable. Like, he was doing silly damage with the Urgrosh. He would be just taking things out left and right. And it seemed no matter what Matt was putting in front of us, he wasn't challenging the characters. And that isn't because he wasn't pitting the right things against us. It was because he wasn't using them in the right way. Or he wasn't challenging us in different aspects. All he did was put monsters in front of us in a room, and we would blast or hack at them until they fell down. You know, there was no tactical finesse. And that's fine. Again, remember, this is his first campaign. So, you know, you can't blame the dude. Like, and I still, to this day, really enjoy this campaign, even though it's bad D&D, but it's good D&D at the same time, because it's D&D, or D&D is good. I'd like you to imagine a montage of Valdane and Droskor just blasting and hacking their way through all these different challenges to get these 3 pieces of the map, which form together to show us the way through the wastes and to this old tomb. And we now jump to the point where Valdane and Droskor are standing in this valley. This valley on the very, very far reaches of the verdant landscape where it meets the desert. And at this point, and we played for a couple of sessions, Matt was getting continually frustrated that Droskor was doing so much damage. He'd have like a real problem with it. Like, he was like, I can't throw anything against you that's challenging because you have such a high armor class and you're doing so much damage. And we were like, well, we can't really... I mean, we don't really know what to say to that. That's not really our problem to deal with. You have to deal with that. You've got to come up with something that's going to challenge Droskor a bit more. The map that we've spent a while recovering the 3 different pieces of is telling us that this king's tomb is at the bottom of it. And at the bottom of this tomb, we imagine there's going to be this medallion. So Valdane and Droskor walk into the valley. And they see before them this vast tomb entrance that's wrought into the side of the rock, and it's sort of at the end of this gorge, this gully. The valley sort of drops into this gorge, so they're just like these narrow sides, and it's like filled with water, like up to waist height. And we're looking at it and we're like, okay, let's just go. And we approach, and Matt, the DM, says, can you please make a listen check? Okay, yeah. We roll fine. There is a rumbling that sounds like an earthquake. We're like, why do we have to do a listen check to hear a fucking earthquake? Rocks fall, the famous rocks fall meme happens. Rocks tumble behind Valdane and Droskor, trapping them within the valley. Droskor looks back. Valdane looks back. Huh, something's happened. And from the water erupts this horrendous creature. It explodes forth from its aquatic domain on 10 long, scaly necks, and upon each neck sits a draconic-esque, hideous face. Before us stands a 10-headed hydra, and Matt says, roll initiative. Of course, being a 10-headed Hydra earns you certain benefits, one of those being that each of those heads gets its own separate initiative roll. This thing explodes out of the water like a thing possessed that is like nothing we've encountered before in the game. It is of a challenge rating far greater than anything we've come across, and that is including the Nightwalker at the end of the last campaign. This thing smashes into Valdane and Droskor with a ferocity and a power that is unstoppable. 10 attacks come raining down upon us both, Valdane and Droskor, and while not all of them connect, enough connect to do a significant amount of damage within the first round. Valdane instantly casts Fly and lifts into the air, deciding that he's going to use, range. That is his strongest weapon, that Valdane can remove himself from battle and just rain down hell from the skies. And Matt hadn't really thought about that because he made rocks fall down. I guess he'd forgotten that Valdane could fly. But sadly, that meant that Droskor was then on his own on the ground facing 10 Hydra head attacks. Now, this isn't mine or Mike's first rodeo, and we understand that certain knowledge rolls can be made to see if Valdane or Droskor knew anything about Hydras. And thankfully, with a successful roll, Valdane was able to work out that whilst Droskor was successfully hacking through one of the Hydra's heads, if Valdane was to attack the stump with fire, it would be cauterized. Hence, the head would not be able to grow back with 2 heads or whatever. We were making progress. Droskor was slicing through another Hydra head, but then another head would just come out of nowhere, seize the dwarf and hurl into the air. Droskor would smash into the side of a cliff and tumble down, hit the ground, and as he'd get up, another one would be like biting into him, and another one, and another one. Droskor was still able to hold his ground. He was able to hack through another Hydra skull. Valdane blasts it with fire, and then one just comes out of nowhere, seizes Droskor by the shoulder, lifts him up into the air, and like 4 or 5 of these heads just clamp onto the dwarf, and Droskor Hammerstone of the Undercroft was dead. And that is where we're going to leave this particular chapter of D&D stories. What's going to happen in this weird and slightly awful campaign? What's going to happen now that Valdane is on his own facing this Hydra? You're just going to have to tune in and find out next time on D&D Stories. Thanks for watching, and as ever, keep gaming.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out the D&D Stories Facebook, Patreon, and t-shirts on Redbubble. Keep gaming!